Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Conversations in Pop Culture. I am your host, Andrew Davis, and this episode is brought to you by my very own shirt, which is right here. Yes, it is a Gundam shirt. It's making fun of Taco Bell as well as Gundam, Fallout, the most interesting man in the world, and I kind of like it, so go purchase my shirt. Also, it is available in a mini skirt because I said, why not? As well as you can go check out my code, which is Pop Anime Comics at BCW Supplies. Get 10% off bags and boards. And on Thursday, I am talking about comic book investing at 9 o'clock free. It's going to be useful for everybody because it will determine one of two things. Either you will be very interested in comic book investing at the end of that 45 minutes, or you will hate it, which might just be the most valuable 45 minutes of your life. So please come check that out on this channel on YouTube. And I'm not going to bore. Of course. And this just does not want me to do this today. It just does not want me to introduce you, man. It just does not want me to introduce you. So I have with me for the third or fourth time I'm saying it in this entire interview, Joseph Duis. So welcome back to the show.
Thanks.
Yeah, no, I'm very excited. It only took us three times to do the introduction, guys. Only three times. And obviously, but of course, it makes sense because we're talking about superheroes. You have a Kickstarter book called Super Heresies, Showcase, Time Travel, Colt, and Bass Reeves. So before we get too deep into the entire thing, and I know this is not necessarily a sequel, but a follow-up to some degree, or just playing in the same world as your entire superheroes world that you've created. What is the basic premise of this comic and the universe that you created?
Super Heresies is kind of like a superhero world where we take public domain characters from the 30s and 40s, and then we kind of show what happened to them if they didn't cease publication, and also we kind of think about what would happen if there hadn't been a comics code, and the characters kind of aged in real time. So we see about probably 4 decades or so of what happens to these characters.
Yeah, and let's even talk about this because obviously, comics have gone through a lot of evolution. Really from the 1930s, almost. I mean, we're 8 years away from 100 years from 1930, so pretty close to 100. And obviously, in the golden age, we had very much self-containing stories. We also had, I don't want to say not censorship, but also comics were easier to understand. They were meant more for kids. They also helped people learn how to read in a lot of ways. And so, what prompted you to say, "Hey, let me go to the golden age"? And then obviously public domain characters as well, because that's a whole nother thing too. And then to take that concept, and I know I'm throwing you a bunch of questions all at once, but to even take the concept, say, what if these characters never fell out of, I guess, favor or didn't become less popular, and where would they be today, or even in the 1970s, or wherever they're placed? And so where did all that come from? Because it is super, super interesting.
Yeah, so I mostly use characters from the 30s and 40s because that's when most of the public domain characters existed. So right after Superman, a lot of these companies came out with superhero characters, but most of them didn't last very long. So superheroes kind of started falling out of favor in the mid to late 40s. But even before then, some of these companies kind of overextended themselves, and they made tons and tons of titles, tons and tons of characters. And, in those days, you had a 64-page comic, and there was, 8 or 9 stories in it, and you had different characters in each one. So they were making tons and tons of characters. They were almost like tryout books where you might have a feature is in there 1 or 2 months, or they're usually bi-monthly. So 1 or 2 issues, and then disappeared because people didn't like the character. And then, when those companies folded, at the time you had to renew copyrights every 28 years, and there was nobody to renew them. So that's why you had a lot of public domain characters from the 30s and especially the 40s. Um, Although you have some, up through 1977, because they just didn't at the time. They didn't mark their issues properly with a copyright notice. So you had some going to the 70s, but majority were in the 30s and 40s when you had all these kind of fly by night companies kind of come up with all these big rosters of characters.
Because I just find this stuff fascinating, and I love comic history, and I truly appreciate it. And obviously, I don't know everything about public domain, but I like the fact that obviously a bunch of these characters are in there. I know Ben Dunn plays sometimes in public domain as well, and there's a few other people who do it as well. And so, what was this like even finding some of these characters? Because we're going to dive into some of them in a second here, but they're interesting, for lack of a better word. And I'm pretty sure you had at least 40, if not 100, to pick from to some degree. So, how did you even find this? And also, what is that like to say, hey, is it just what has the most information, or is there like a whole process that you go through? Because I'm so interested in this stuff.
So there's actually a wiki page. It's a crowdsourced wiki. It's called Public Domain Superheroes, pdsh.wikia.com, and you can just go on there and look for anything you're looking for. There's things are categorized a million different ways, by powers, gender, planet of origin, nationality, whatever you're looking for in there. And then there are a couple of sites, comicbookplus.com and digitalcomicmuseum.com, and they have people. These are also crowdsourced sites, and they have people who have copies of the original issues and have scanned them in, and then anybody can read them for free. So, um, once you kind of find the character you're looking for on the wiki, then there's a list of the public domain appearances, so you can just go and find those issues and read the comics without spending thousands of dollars to buy 80-year-old comics. And then and then from there you do some research and make sure they're really public domain, check the copyrights, make sure they really did expire, um, and yeah, just go from there after you read the original appearances. And most of these had very few. They kind of get a feel for the character, decide we're going to change, what you're going to keep, and all that. The best thing about public domain is you can do whatever you want.
Yeah, and then obviously, I mean, you picked certain characters that I think called to you and that you found interesting. And then obviously, this entire book almost reads like a Marvel Presents in a lot of ways, where it's four different stories. The stories don't interact with each other. I mean, they can technically, and some of them can, some of them can't, just because of time differences. But obviously, what was this like even doing four different stories and having fun with it and doing it very much like that Marvel Presents type of story, and going into like this big, I guess, Golden Age 64 page plus type book as well, and keeping it really to what I think its original faith was to some degree.
Yeah, I really wanted to do it kind of in a format like a bunch of the reprint books from the 70s when they reprinted mostly Golden Age stories. They had kind of these oversized. First it was 100, then it was 80, then it was 60 because they all wanted to keep the same price, but Page Comics, sometimes it'd be newer stuff, and most of the time it was reprints. Sometimes I mix in a new story with the reprint, but most of the time it was reprints in the Golden Age. So that was kind of my kind of initial thought is like, what if these comics were published in the 40s and then in the 70s they were reprinted, so you'd have like one new story in there, then you have some older ones mixed in, because I really wanted to be able to set them, anytime between 1930 and 1977, kind of anywhere between the golden and the bronze ages. And so that was kind of what I did. And I used kind of the DC Giant format. And that's why we did that homage cover that we did, is homage to Jimmy Olsen 131, which was a giant.
And then obviously we're going to get into all that stuff in a second, or maybe not a second, but I do want to talk about some of the stories here because that's what's really interesting. And obviously, I want to talk about the family. And obviously, it features Madame Fatale, who is Richard Stockton, an actor who's undercover as an old lady. And obviously, Richard's daughter gets kidnapped. and I guess Richard has been searching for the last 40 years for his daughter, and he hasn't found his daughter yet, but he stopped plenty of crime. And now there's a whole new, I guess, thing where Richard or Matt Lady, I guess Madame Fatel is looking for people disappearing in a biker situation right now on a certain path of a highway. And so, what was this like researching, you know, Richard Stockton and Madame Fatel and all that stuff because that's super old and going way back, and then also fast forwarding 40 years too, because that's where this thing gets fascinating. At least this story to me is super fascinating in that regard, because now we have a hero who has a lot of questions. But I'm gonna ask my follow-ups in a second. I'm getting ahead of myself.
Yeah, what's funny about the character who was originally called Madame Fatal, and we added the e's at the end. But Madame Fatal, he's his daughter gets kidnapped. In the first story, you hear all this whole backstory about his daughter kidnapped. His wife died of shock when she found out. He quit acting and he went undercover for a decade and all this stuff. And then he had 21 more appearances, and they never mentioned the backstory again. It was just like it is the most golden age thing you can imagine. Was like, yeah, and now Madame Fatal. It's this guy dressed up like a woman and goes and is a detective. And like that's it. And and it's so funny that they completely abandoned it and they went for like 4 years like this with no furtherance of the story. Like, why did he suddenly stop looking for his daughter? Um, Especially because at the end of the first story, he finds out that she's still alive. So, so I said, you got to do something with this. I wanted to tell it in the '70s because I read Charles Manson's biography, and it's super interesting. Is the guy who wrote it is somebody who fixed his car for free once, and he comes visit him in jail, and he says, I want to write your biography, and he had rejected everybody else, but he goes, oh yeah, I remember when you fixed my car for free, so I'll tell you everything. So it's like this whole thing where they were living at the ranch and everything, and you kind of got the whole story from Mance's perspective. But so I wanted to use that setting of the Spawn Ranch and the whole thing about an abandoned Western set that was like really compelling, and at the same time, make a commentary on cults of personality that were made really big news in the '70s, like the Manson family, and also Jonestown, and even we see that even today, really, with the Hale Bopp comet and all these various cults of personality that we're seeing lately. So I wanted to kind of like, use the character to kind of say, this is this is something that can go on. People can be dedicated to these sort of toxic people without it necessarily being religious per se.
And then even going further into this, because obviously I don't want to ruin the story and what goes on and what happens. But I think people have somewhat of an idea. But even going further, when you advance a character 40 years, obviously, Richard has been undercover and has been fighting crime. And then I'm not saying Richard has been this old lady for the last 40 years continuously. I'm
Yeah.
assuming not. I don't want to make any assumptions here. But obviously, he's been fighting crime under this alias. And but 40 years, obviously you get a different perspective. If you've advanced it 40 years, your body's different. Also, society has changed from the 1930s to the 1970s as well. And so what was this like really to get to play with that? Because, we don't see in traditional superhero stories, we don't see Batman from 1980 coming into Batman in 2020. We don't really know when Batman takes place. And I'm just using a Batman as an example for this. But what is that like? Because you do get to play with this and this. And I think that's what makes it fun in a lot of ways. And that's what's cool about this. And in the 1930s, I don't think there was like a mysterious biker gang and massive cults doing what they're doing in the 70s.
Yeah. So we have kind of a backstory that we don't really go into too much, but there was a period where the most of the characters kind of skipped over 12 years, and so they're not as old physically as they should be, but also they're kind of in culture shock, and we we'll talk about that a little bit. So the next comic we're doing is going to be another superhero she showcase. So we're going to use different characters and then kind of see how it affected some of the other characters. But it caused a lot of problems. And one thing with Madame Fatale is that she kind of, to the extent that she ever was looking for daughter, the trail kind of went cold if you're missing a dozen years in here. Um, but also at the same time, one thing that was really funny about the original stories is that nobody ever figured out that this old lady was a crime fighter. Like he never took on an alternate identity or anything. Um, you still there? I think I lost you.
I can hear.
Okay, yeah, you are there. Okay. Um, you know, um, so for 4 years, nobody ever figured out that this old lady was a crime fighter, even though, um, she took down all of these criminals. And I kind of went with that and was like, well, let's just bring it forward and kind of say that maybe people forgot about the character, but not everybody. Maybe some people have heard all these things that she's done.
Yeah, yeah, and I just think it's fascinating. And obviously, in superhero land, I was speaking to somebody about Top Gun, and you have to suspend some belief to some degree. And I think with this as well, you have to suspend some belief. Where I do not expect, Richard to be a 62 years old fighting crime the same way.
Yeah.
Obviously, I have to give some leniency of those 40 years, but at the same time, and I think that that's something that people when they come into any comic, they have to realize that you have to give some leniency where 40 years in comics is not 40 years in the human world, for lack of a better word here. But obviously, it's very interesting. And I don't want to keep pushing on this one, but I do just want to show what some of the art looks like. And obviously, this is some of it, and it is pretty cool. That's not technically that's the next one, everybody. Um, and that's fascinating too, which is the future warriors. And obviously, we're dealing with the scarabs, mystical ring, and it's a story within a story within a story. It's really what's going on. Where we have an archaeologist finding a ring, and then we discover how the ring, was made, and then a superhero using the ring to defeat Cubans who wanted to bring tanks and some other weapons into, I guess, Egypt. I want to say, or maybe not Egypt. I don't know exactly, but this is like just straight up fantasy.
Yeah. 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 It's in Egypt during the reign of Akhenaten. And it's funny how we see like mythological figures and gods a lot in comics, and um, a lot of times these shared worlds tend to take like multiple mythologies and kind of mix them together. But in this one, I kind of wanted to show like Akhenaten being this pharaoh who tried to convert everyone to monotheism, and nobody really liked it. And because people are like, well, we already have gods, why are we converting to this worship of one god and we had multiple gods before and it's a different god? And people just didn't really buy it. So kind of in that political context of like, this is a guy who is probably has either Marfan syndrome or something similar where he's going to die pretty soon, and he wants to make sure that people convert to his religion. And what if so my thing is like, what if the old gods are real, which we kind of see in the original Scarab stories, and Aten is actually just kind of like a propaganda campaign, and why would that be effective? And came up with the idea of Apep, the god of chaos, kind of pushing this along. And when these time travelers come from the future, he uses that to kind of exploit this religious sectarianism.
Yeah, there's just a lot of stuff that's going on, and obviously a lot of things are in play, and it's sort of and then I say this nicely, we're pretty much throwing the entire kitchen sink into this story. in a lot of ways. And it's just one of those things that's fun to read. And I don't want to dive too much into it because I think actually the last stand of Bass Reeves really is the one that steals the entire comic. And obviously there's a lot of stuff going on with this one. You're reimagining Thomas Red Reeves as Ruth Red Reeves, who is a 9-year-old black girl living in Oklahoma in 1939, I think. And so what was this like really just taking that concept of a public domain character from the golden age and then reimagining him, but also keeping it in the golden age, if that makes any sense. And where did even that idea come from? Because that's a whole reimagination of the character. And I don't want to say it's bending it because you can do anything you want, as you stated, to public domain, but even just that concept is very interesting to me.
Yeah, so that's that story. There's a character called Red Reeves who had two appearances in 1939 and 1940 in Silver Street Comics, and was basically kind of a kid's wish fulfillment comic where there's a little white boy and he finds a marble and there's a genie inside of it, and he's trying to figure out how to wish effectively because the genie will do anything he wants. It wasn't even a superhero comic really. It was just kind of a kid's fantasy comic. And so so I was like, we have a lot of these characters. Um, and the Golden Age characters are very frequently white, almost all white, and less male, but also mostly male. So I was like, let's just change this one. And I turned it from a white boy into a black girl, and then I decided like, wouldn't it be interesting because we find out nothing about the genie in the original Red Reef stories. So like, would it be interesting if the genie were somehow connected and there were some um, backstory to this character? So then I realized her last name was Reeves, so I decided to have Bass Reeves as the genie, and everybody wants to use Bass Reeves probably at some point. So just like let's do that and have her be the great granddaughter, and then we'll talk about how Bass Reeves became trapped inside of the marble, and that's something they never did, and they never explained anything about the genie, so we never got to see that in the original Red Reeves stories, and I wanted to just kind of be like a something for kids, and um, kind of a what might have happened in 1939 if comics had been somewhat more diverse, and and show like kind of a kid fantasy story, but also that's sort of grounded in history and reality.
Yeah, and even to go further into this, because obviously we're sort of discovering, obviously it's Bass Reeves in a lot of ways telling his great granddaughter how he got trapped and his adventure, and obviously he can grant her any wish, but she wants to know how he got there, and that's what's fascinating. We start seeing, him and his journeys, and obviously he's, I think, a deputy U.S. Marshal and everything's going on, and it's very very interesting because it's kind of, I don't want to say it's a story within a story, but it's almost like he's telling his great granddaughter almost like a fairy tale to put her to bed to something. That's how I read it, and maybe I'm reading a little bit too much into it, but obviously when we all read comics a little bit differently, but like that's how I kind of read. I'm like, oh, okay, this is kind of a cool interpretation where this is sort of a parent, reading a book to their kid to put them to bed, but in a different way. And so I just thought it was very, very well done. And I also think it's a nice twist to kind of flip the script as well.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Thanks. I always try to sort of put things in within the context of historical events, and that's why we have Iconon in the second story and the Spawn Ranch in the first story.
And also, it's nice the fact that this is also Midwest. Nothing against, I guess, traditional superheroes, but I don't really get the sense from any major, comic company that they're in the Midwest. And I think people forget that, Oklahoma exists in America.
Yeah.
And, it's just not California and New York, guys.
Yeah.
There's all this land in between. and, and,
Yeah.
and, and while Florida's nice and the beaches are great down there, there's also other places, and I think that's something that's also very nice where just diversity of location is a
Yeah,
big issue.
yeah, and Red Reeves, the original story, um, definitely was an urban setting because Red Reeves kind of played in the street with other kids, and it looked like a city. And it did kind of give like a New York feel to me. But I decided to move it to Oklahoma City because Oklahoma City is the biggest city in Oklahoma, and also it's kind of close to Bass Reeves where he operated, and for the most part, and where his family might have settled. I thought so. I want to do it that way, and then also the cultist of Yig, who's in the story. From the Curse of Yig, the story that Lovecraft revised, which was written by Zelia Ward. The cult of Yig operates out of the American Southwest, so I thought that Bass Reeves handed me this cultist of Yig, like might have been in Oklahoma, so it all kind of came together.
Yeah, and I just think it's nice to have a massively diverse story on multiple levels and flipping things upside. And then let's talk about the flesh. I mean, the secret origins of Dash Dartwell. Obviously, I kind of made the joke that the Dash is very much like the Flash, but he kind of loses his speed after the death of his mentor, Dr. Moss, in the 1950s, and then all of a sudden he needs to figure out how to make new speed pills.
Yeah,
Say that 10 times fast, everybody, and you'll mess it up like me too. I promise. But and now he needs to figure out how to do it. But then he finds a journal that he wrote himself from 1962, and then we have basically him sort of discovering that entire thing of how maybe he anticipated the problem and then he wrote something and then he found it and then he's telling himself what's going to happen in the
yeah.
future. So what was this like really just even building this story out? Because it's kind of fun. It's obviously rooted in very much what the Flash is somewhat rooted in and a variety of other stuff. And it's sort of, it could technically be partially based in the Flash to some degree as well.
Yeah, this was a really fun story to write. Like, it was the first, it was the first one I did when we were supposed to be in the original Super Heresies, but the pages were a little late, so it didn't make it. So I decided I was like, let's just do a bunch of other stories and then put them all together in a new comic. So this story is really the only reason why the comic exists. But um, yeah, so I was like, let's take some of these like super speed tropes, like the original Dash Dartwell stories. Um, it was just so interesting because at this point, in the game and comics, the idea of superheroes is still being formed. Like nobody really knew what the tropes were. You had Dash Dartwell, who was a guy who took some pills, and the first thing he literally does is he competes. He competes in a foot race, and he wins. So, it's similar to what Jay Garrick did. When he first got a super speed, he became a football star. So, you know, he has no compunctions about using his powers for selfish reasons. He doesn't have a mask. He doesn't have a costume. He doesn't have a secret, like an alternate identity. He's just the guy. And most of the time he was wearing a suit, and that was pretty common to do when you're going out in those days. But I just thought it would be cool if like that's just what his fashion is, like. And over the years, he might get different types of suits, but he always wants to wear a business suit, and he's the kind of guy who will never leave the house if he doesn't have a business suit on, because he feels like that's the way you're supposed to dress. So, so I thought about this, and I was like, like this would be kind of cool, like if he was kind of like if he had kind of a different voice and he was more like a Johnny Thunder, where not the same powers as Johnny Thunder, but like he was kind of the comic relief of the group. Um, and so I thought a lot about what his voice would be and what his lines would be. And he definitely wasn't fast enough to travel through time in the original stories, but I I thought about it and I was like, let's use some of these super speed tropes like we've seen with the Flash a lot, where there's time travel and so and then I thought about like why he would have the name Dash if he when he was born, if he didn't have super speed at that time, and that's why I came up with this, and that's why it's a secret origin of Dash Dartwell in quotation marks, because it's the secret origin of his name, not of the character. So that's why I had the kind of this time travel plot, and I also got to show the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was fun, and I got to see how the Cubans got back to ancient Egypt and how he how he says to go back for them, and he has plenty of time, of course, because he's a time traveler. So, um, so I thought a lot about this and just kind of do it like a fun story where he kind of isn't taking it totally seriously, and then it's kind of a mystery for the 1950 dashes who is confused by the whole thing, but he's lost his speed. Um, and even when he had his speed, he wasn't fast enough to travel through time. So yeah, I love those any kind of time travel thing where you go back and leave yourself something like that's kind of a fun thing to do.
Oh, it's a fun topic. It's a fun topic to talk about, and
Yeah,
I like those things too. I like even just how even dealing with that and how you not screw it up, but then you do screw it up, and it's all a
yeah,
blast. And
yeah,
obviously, there's a lot of stuff that's in play, and also this one isn't that long, which is also nice as well. Where I think it's the shortest story out of the bunch,
yeah,
and it's kind of nice to just have a breather. And it sounds weird. I'm actually very curious. One of the things that I find in comics and in particular in anthologies is sometimes the pacing is wrong, where you need to have a breather, and maybe it's because I'm a spoiled wrestling guy, where a good wrestling show has a really banger match, which means the whole crowd is pumped up, and then sometimes they'll put the next banger match right next to it, and we're just steamrolling into it. But then you don't want to put the main event, and you don't want to have three banger matches because people are going to get burned out. You want to give a cooling off period. And I'm curious how you feel about that because I feel like in books and in comics, even if you're not structuring, you want to have really hot stories that get everybody pumped up, but you also want to have a story where it's kind of like, okay, I'm breathing a little bit and it's relaxed because you want to control people's emotions and not to manipulate them. Let's not go down that route, but you don't want to burn out, I guess, a reader if that makes sense because you can do that very easily in a comic book
yeah,
technically. So I'm curious how you feel about that because it's something that I've noticed a lot lately, and I'm kind
yeah,
of on an anthology kick. And so that's something that I'm having like real issues with certain people and their writing styles.
yeah. I mean, I think part of it is it's easier for me to write shorter stories than to write longer stories, and a lot of people have kind of the opposite problem. But for me, like I can write a short story. It's fine. There's not a lot of moving parts, and I can focus on the plot. And I also kind of wanted to take inspiration from the Golden Age stories, which are always really short, and they're always self-contained. So that's why the Madame Fatale story at the beginning is longer because I kind of spaced it out a little bit more, so it'd be more like a Bronze Age story, which they were generally quite a bit longer than Golden Age stories. So like Madame Fatal, all of her stories were 5 pages long. You get 5 pages over and 22 issues, 5 pages. So really, you got 4 years of stories, and you only got 100 pages. And so you had to in these books that were had multiple stories in them. You had to really make an impression in a very short amount of time, very few pages, and frequently you had a lot of panels in a page. And sometimes it's painfully obvious that they wanted to do it longer but didn't have more pages. But but that was kind of my idea. Is like let's just do this like it's one of the Golden Age books, and just have a bunch of short stories where we get a feel for the character. Like the DC black, white, and what is it?
Superman, red, white, and blue.
Yes, yeah, Superman, red, white, and blue. Batman, black and white. You got the Marvel ones. They have like the black, white, and blood. But those are like really instructive, I think, because you have these characters that are very iconic. So obviously, you don't need to explain all that much about them, but you really can get the essence of a character within 5 or 6 or 8 pages, and you don't need really a ton of background. I mean, even these characters who are not well known, you can do the background in just like a caption box at the beginning, and you don't have to explain everything. You just tell the basics. And with that, you can establish character very early on and just get into the story and get into the plot, and then you can get out.
Yeah, no. It's fascinating. Even going further into this, because obviously superheroes right now, and I'm going to be very nice, and hopefully I'm not going to get attacked for it. I think superhero books, for the most part, are in a bad position in comics right now, and I don't think it's the art, and I don't think it's the writing per se. I think that the art and the writing are missing each other, and I think that a lot of these companies, obviously corporate interests, and they have shareholders, they have television shows, they have movies to answer to, and also they're experimenting with every idea and they just throw it at the wall and see what sticks. With a lot of characters and people, I mean, I'm not going to get into that. That's a whole complicated issue. That's in like 3 weeks on my comic book hangout. We're going to talk about that idea for 2 hours. That's the time and the place to do it. But it'll be fun. It'll be fun, and a lot of people are welcome to join us. It'll be fun. Everybody grab a drink, and it'll get rowdy, but it'll be civil. But everybody can get their opinions out. But why do you think? Because I think with the golden age, they're just fun. It's just comics, and there's none of this corporate BS and corporate answering. And every decision, if Batman punches with his left hand, has an adverse effect that affects every other aspect of the DC universe, for lack of a better word. And not to pick on Batman today. So if you're a Batman fan, I apologize to everybody,
Yeah.
but it's kind of like, why do you think that people are saying, hey, look, I just want comics like this back, and I just want basic comics that aren't so complicated, because I feel like that's the major problem with comics right now.
Yeah. I mean, I always like to use the example like um, my son used to be a really big Star Wars fan, so I bought some of the Star Wars comics for him, and I was reading them to him before he could read. And it was a Darth Vader miniseries, and the first page is a recap page. Okay, that's fine, recap page. Pages 2 and 3 are double page spread that just says the title of the comic and Star Wars with no art and the credits, and that's it. I'm like, why are you wasting 2 pages and there's no art? Like, it doesn't make sense to me. And then the rest of the comic is three panels on every page. So I'm just like, what is going on with this? Like, this is a 6 issue miniseries. It probably doesn't need to be 6 issues. Um, and it's just it kind of bothers me when I read something that's like highly decompressed like that. Um, but at the same time, you know, I'm old enough. I grew up. My first comic book, my dad bought me at a convenience store when I was 6 years old, and it was before you could find back issues anywhere. You just had to get whatever was there, and it's always somebody's first comic, and I think that's especially true with indie comics, where maybe I might not finish this next one in time. Then you know you can at least have the entire story now. And if I'm going to give you 40 pages or really 39 pages, I want it to be more or less complete. And it's not to say that all this stuff doesn't exist in the same universe. It does not to say that there's no references to anything else, and you will certainly get more out of it if you read other stories in the same world. But really don't need to. And it's also kind of good if you want to attract new people on a Kickstarter. Just say like, hey, you don't need to read the previous one. And a lot of people will say, okay, maybe I don't really need to read the previous one, but I want to read the previous one anyway, and I'll get it anyway. So, they have that option.
Yeah, and even to talk about, because you mentioned something that I think is very relevant. I'm actually working on a project, and we're speaking about trends on a project. And one of the trends that has occurred is a lot of companies are moving to one shots, or they're moving to limited series, and they are moving to shorter runs. Not necessarily shorter print runs, but shorter to the point where they're doing a 72 page every quarter. And what they're doing is that 72 page is pretty complete. Doesn't mean that you can't add to it on the front end, the back end, to the side of it, for lack of a better word. but I think that there is a massive shift where readers want things more complete. They want almost a mini graphic novel. I don't find 72 pages to be a graphic novel. I find it to be a mini graphic novel, but I do find it to be substantial. I'd rather pay $9 and get 72 pages and be like, okay, I don't have to worry about it. And now I have a beginning, middle, and end, and I actually have real content. And even if it's only 3 panels on each page, it's at least complete and it's a bigger chunk of the story and it's almost bin watching. And so that's something that I think, has significantly changed in the last 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
And I think, especially on Kickstarter, but I also think that the big guys, and there's a few companies that are really making those moves because I think they're understanding, saying, look, people want to sit down and read something for 30 minutes. They don't want to flip through a comic book and then wait next month for it.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think that I feel like I have seen more of those recently, like those DC magazine size Black Label stuff, like Batman Damned, and sometimes they're in 2 parts, like Superman versus Lobo, but they are longer. They have no ads, um, and they are magazine size, so you can get more on each page.
I mean, Zenoscope does 72 pagers, one shots. And the reason why is that, they're like, hey, look, we'll do 64 pages. We'll do 72 pages because they want to get and give their audience more story. And that's the whole thing, is that they've basically said, look, it's easier for us to write it. It's easier for us to do the art. And we don't have to worry about breaking it up. We don't have to put a cliffhanger in there.
Yeah,
It sounds weird, and I'm not a writer, but putting a cliffhanger in a book can be a bitch.
yeah,
It really can. And it could also ruin the flow of an entire project. And so I think that's the other thing too, is on a story structure point. And look, again, I haven't written a comic, so I could be completely talking out of my behind here. But from what I've read, how many times does a cliffhanger ruin the entire flow of a book, right? Like,
yeah. And I think when I did Crusade of Dracula, I did it in 3 issues, but they were all kind of oversized, and I really wanted to do it in one that was over 100 pages, but it wasn't really feasible financially. So it's the only reason I split it up. But the reason I split it up into 3 instead of 4 or 5 or 6 is just I had sort of natural cliffhangers built in, and I just sort of built it around that. So the first one was 44 pages. The second and third were 36. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think it's better. I mean, I read a lot of stuff in trades. I started getting omnibuses, which are like 600 pages of stuff. And
glory of
yeah,
glory, I say.
yeah, I got the Justice League International one, and I was like, oh man, I want to finish reading this, but I can't bring it anywhere. I have to read it at home. It's just gigantic. But yeah, like I like that idea of getting the whole story, no matter how many pages it is. Just got the whole story. And I think I even like, if it's multiple stories, just to read them all in one volume instead of multiple volumes. Even in a case like this where they're different characters. Um, because I kind of wanted to do this one in 60 pages, but then I sort of revised it down to 40 pages because it was more realistic for me to be able to actually put that out. But I think maybe going forward, we might reprint some of these in 60 pages. So I think that's a good length, or even 80 or 100, just to get everything in there. And like with the Scarab story and the Dash Darwell story that are sort of connected, you kind of see those connections and just read it all at once.
And then obviously, I mean, there's a lot of stuff, and I don't know if you're going to continue some of these characters, or you're going to go more into some new Golden Age stuff, or you're going to do a mixture of stuff. And you might take a break from one character, add something else in there, and go that route. I don't really know. So obviously, and I'm sure people have questions because there's going to be people who fall in love with some of these characters and what they're doing and want to know more about who they are, and even just more about their stories.
Yeah, I definitely want to come back to all of them probably at some point. But I think we have other ones we want to introduce first and kind of establish. Because so my idea for this super heresies line was to kind of have one comic that was for solo stories, and that's Showcase, and then we have one that's for the team stories, and that's called Comics, and then the other one is for superhero team up duos, and that would be Presents. But so in the original superhero series, I have kind of one of each of those stories, one solo, one team, and one duo story. Almost kind of like a map as to where I want to try to go in the future. So I want to show kind of the main story of the world through the team stuff, and then the showcase to focus more on some character work, and the team up story is just to kind of show how relationships form between these characters. So
Yeah, and obviously there's a lot to play with, and I mean there's so many directions it can go into. Um, and obviously I'm not going to push too hard because I don't want to spoil anything for anybody. But I do want to talk about rewards because you got a bunch of them. So obviously anybody can get the digital reward. It's reasonably priced. Shipping is still a problem. Anybody can get the digital reward. There's also, I think, like a digital, essentially deluxe, where it's the digital issue, it's the theme song. I think it's the showcase companion, which I think the companion, and correct me if I'm wrong, is some of the original stories side
yep,
by side with the new stories, and so you could see both. And I don't know if it's page by page aside or if it's story by story aside, but obviously you can compare, and so you can get that digitally. I also think you get the showcase as well, companion, printed, I believe, right? Or
yep,
I'm making sure. I don't remember everything.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. The companion reprints the first appearances from the 1930s and 40s of the characters, so you can see those brief appearances there.
Because that's I think one of the characters. And did Mike did Carlo do that one?
Yeah, Mike DiCarlo did this cover. I grew up reading a lot of comics that he inked. He was there when Lobo was created, when KG Beast was created. He just done Valiant, Bongo, Marvel.
He's got some promiscuous Archie covers, I believe. I think he might have done like the first Veronica and Betty in a bikini cover. I think.
I'm not sure, but there was a guy named Dan DiCarlo that did a lot of Archie work. So I think that might have been him. But yeah, they both of them have done Archie, so I'm not sure which one it would be.
What one of them did like the first bikini, and it's an inexpensive book. And that's the only reason why I know it. It's a weird book to own, but it's like a pricey. It's like $150 book, which is crazy because
Yeah,
it's
that
not a
is.
good book. It's really not. Like
But
so,
but yeah, he's really a great guy, and I showed him the Jimmy Olsen cover, and I'm like, just do this and replace the characters, and
and
and he
then
did, and
there's
it turned out
this
really well.
which is the companion, and so obviously it's that mashup, and then there's this right here, which I think basically is taking the old stuff and then putting something over it, and it's I forget who did the overlay on it.
Yeah, this is David Jackson did all the new figures, and just superimpose them off of the old comics. The laziest variant cover we've ever seen, but
And then there's this one as well, which is the giant, super heresy showcase, which is just obviously what it says is it's a giant book.
yeah, it's all the stories plus the scripts and the commentary pages. So you get kind of deep into why we did things we did, what our inspirations were, and that kind of thing.
And then obviously I think you can get a bunch of this stuff also in PDF and a variety of other stuff. And then also there's some other things you've done. And obviously I think this is your third or fourth time on my show. So if you want to know more about Joseph Duis, obviously check out the other interviews. But I know that you've done Cult of Dracula, Dr. Orange. You've done some other Super Heresy stuff. You've done some work in the Advocator, which is just other comic work. There's always some stuff that obviously you just did a horror magazine that you were on for what I think 2 months ago, and then you've got a bunch of other anthology stories, and so there's a whole big catch up package that you can pick up as well, where you're like, oh man, I missed a bunch of Kickstarter stuff from you in the past, and well, I want the whole shebang, for lack of a better word. And so that's also on the table. I think you also have a tier where you can be drawn in to
Yep.
one of these stories as well. And then I don't know if you're adding, you could add on backer stuff as well in backer kit, or even after they pledge, they could sort of add on other copies of stuff. I don't know if that's on the table too.
Yeah, I don't think I'm gonna do back. Okay, well, we'll see. But yeah, I don't think I will. But there are a bunch of add-ons just within the Kickstarter. Like if you missed some things but not others, you can add on different comics. There's a Super Heresies theme song we made for the original Super Heresies that you can add that on. Before I had a few people add that one on, and you can add the companion and the giant to different things if you don't want everything that comes with those tiers. So you can mix and match just about everything.
Yeah, and I think that that's very important at this point because obviously, and one of the things that bothers me on Kickstarters is that I have money at different times in the year. Oddly enough, every July I'm broke, and every September I have a surplus. It's been like that for the last 5 years. I do not foresee it changing. And so, if you run a Kickstarter in July, I have no money. I just it's happened the last 5 years, and in September I'm like, where's all the good Kickstarters? And it's terrible. So if you want me to back your campaign, don't run in July, and you'll be fine. Um, this show's about me, guys. It's completely about me. Um, it's about me convincing everybody not to run a Kickstarter in July. That's really the premise of this show.
Well, it's funny. A lot of the sites that say like what month you should run it. Like aside from December, July is one they say is like the worst month to run a Kickstarter in. I find that to be really interesting. I'm not sure why that would be. I guess people say, "Oh, well, it's in the middle of summer, people on vacation." Whatever.
It's everybody's at the beach and everybody's drinking a Corona at the beach, and everybody's like Kickstarter Corona, Kickstarter Corona, Kickstarter Corona.
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
no, no. I have a pretty good idea. It's just July. July is a busy month. That's why for a lot of people. Is my guess on it. But in all seriousness, though, I think it is very important that creators understand that you know you don't have to print another 100 copies if you have only 250 copies, but making some of those books available in other Kickstarters, whether that's on as an add-on or another tier, I think it's very important because people have money at different points in their life. Also,
yeah.
sometimes in life, a Kickstarter comes along and you back that Kickstarter and then somebody else's, but you just don't have the money to do both. And I think it's a mistake that I'm finding where I'm like, how do you not have other variants from your other Kickstarter? And I know you have them too. And why wouldn't you want to release them on it as like an add-on? And it baffles me.
Yeah, yeah, because people have buyer behavior. Like if they even if they have money, they might not want to buy from an online store. They might not want to buy from a convention.
Yeah,
They might keep
I'll throw you another one. Let's say that I'm meeting you for the first time, and I'm like, cool, you got a $10 tier. Sometimes with me, I'm like, look, let me see what this person actually has done, right? So I don't have a problem if your book is $5 or $10. I'll take a $10 risk, and then I've then bought $100 tier from somebody the next time they ran. But I'm not going to go out and buy $100 tier
yeah,
unless you know who you are. And it sounds kind of crazy, but I'm like, wait a second, because I've been burned on Kickstarter. Other people have been. I'm waiting on two books right now that I don't think I'm ever going to get on Kickstarter, and possibly a third with an incident that just happened. So I'm now sort of pulling back a little bit because I'm a little like I'm licking some wounds here. And so I'm very, very skeptical. But if your book's $10, I'm more likely to back your book. And then if you prove to me that, oh, okay, you actually deliver, especially if you're a brand new creator, right? And so
Yeah.
that's how I view things is that I think it's very important that all of a sudden you might have a variant I love and it's $50, but I'm like, look, I don't trust you yet. This is the first date, we're not going to jump into bed so quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's hard when you're first starting out. This is my 11th month, so I think I've I think I've earned some trust from some people. And I have that backer favorite badge on Kickstarter because I've delivered so many campaigns. But even if you're on my level, people are always going to be discovering you who didn't know about you before, and it's good to have something that's really affordable in there, even if it's just a digital book. I've kind of had to increase my price on this one for print because paper costs have gone up a lot, and also because this is a color book, and I was kind of in shock by how much it is to print color books. I haven't done it in like 2.5 years, so uh,
I was actually going to ask just because I think it's a very important question. Obviously, I'm actually trying to negotiate with some sponsors. Um, but I was I mean obviously just so everybody knows, Mixum. Obviously we parted ways, and it was okay. And Mixum's a great printer, but I kind of got wind that there's printing problems coming, and I don't think they're going to get much better for years. I don't. And obviously things have gone up, and it's both shipping and a variety of other stuff. And I'm
yeah,
very curious how you've adapted to that because that's not something that's in your control. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Versus saying you can control if your artist isn't working fast enough, you could call up your artist and be like, can you work a little faster?
yeah,
But you can't like be like, we don't have any trees.
yeah.
Trees grow faster, so we can cut you. You can't like go that
We can't-
route. So,
yeah.
and also, you're not alone. So, how have you been adapting? In all seriousness, getting back to the point to that, because I think it's a real struggle that a lot of people are facing.
Yeah, yeah, I recently had to switch printers. That there was a printer I was using that went out of business because of supply chain issues, and they were like really affordable and really reliable. But I kind of had to switch printers with the last Kickstarter, and that actually turned out fine. But you never know with a new printer. You never know what you're going to get, and so there's just a lot of trust you need to earn and all that. But yeah, and then next time you look at it, it might have gone up because supply costs have gone up, and you can't really prepare for everything.
And shipping.
Yeah,
Let's
shipping has gone up too. Yeah, um, so you can't prepare for all that, but you just do the best you can do. I had a international shipping thing last time where somebody bought something from Canada, and like I was like, Canada, it's probably like 25 bucks, right? Like it was $43 to ship to Canada. I'm like, it's just. I realize I'm not like in the north part of the country, but it's literally over the border. Like how much would it be? I didn't have anybody from Australia at that time, but I've had Australians before, and it's been really expensive. So I can't even imagine how much it's Australia and New Zealand now if you're sending something to Canada. And granted, it was kind of a big package, but $43 that was not on my budget.
Yeah, there's a reason why I don't ship in my eBay business internationally. I didn't go international on any physical goals on my campaign. And granted, my campaign was more digital anyway with what I did. But even still, I don't ship, in my eBay store outside the US. And the reason why is because it's just a headache. It is a headache. And also it's the idea that if a package is spending 3 weeks on a boat heading to Australia, there's just more things that can go wrong versus
Yeah,
spending 2 days in the mail. Not saying that things can't go wrong in the mail either, but things are less likely to go wrong over 2 days statistically than over 3 weeks in a boat to Australia. But
yeah. I shipped something to Germany, and It took about 90 days to get there. Like it was like they kept it at the post office and it didn't say anything. So like she kind of had to keep going by the post office, like, do I have a package or like what's going on, you know? And like you just imagine just keeping everything at post office and not even like notifying the person. It just like okay, it doesn't make sense to me, but
It's crazy, and it's a crazy world, and this is why I don't want that headache. I just don't. There's no good reason for me to ship anything internationally. And honestly, if somebody wanted a book of mine and they wanted to really pay, we would figure out off eBay to fix that problem. But again, if I ran a comic book at some point and I had a book and somebody wanted something, I'd be like, look, let's figure it out off of all of this because it's going to be so much easier versus doing it on Kickstarter. But I digress. Again, I'm not at that point. I can't speak on that point. I just avoid problems is all I'm going to say. But I get that people want to deliver it to people all over the world. I get it.
yeah.
But I do want to back out of your entire campaign. I think I got most of the rewards in there. Obviously, this one is super, super cool because it's sort of the original covers and some panels from the page done, obviously, by Mike DiCarlo. So obviously that's a cool one. And then there's these that are just really cool as well. And obviously you can pick up whatever you need to pick up, everybody. It's a cool book. Obviously they are fun and they're cool covers. I'll say that. But I do want to back out of everything. And I don't want to ask you about Kickstarter, cons, anything of that nature, because we've been through that already. Instead, we're doing speed round.
All
Who
right.
wins in a fight, Flash or Green Lantern?
Uh, well, I guess Flash could just take the ring and then toss it out into space. And yeah, although I guess Green Lantern can control it without touching it. Yeah, I still think Flash. Flash is way overpowered. It's got to be Flash.
And then obviously moving on from there, I'm not even going to ask for an explanation. I don't really want an explanation. We're just going to leave it out there. Everybody can have their own interpretations. Who, in your opinion, right now is the best variant comic artist in the game?
Um, the best indie comic artist in the game, or just comic artist?
Best variant artist.
Oh, best variant artist.
I mean, this could be anybody. You can go
Yeah,
like Marvel, like you go J. Scott
Scotty
Campbell,
Young
you go to
probably.
Stan Yak. I mean, the
Yeah,
spectrum is huge.
yeah, Scotty Young, I would say.
That,
You know a Scotty Young cover when you see it. I guess there could be a few other people in the category. Some of my friends really like Peach Momoko. Um, but yeah, I would say Scotty Young because it's a very very unique style.
he
Back in the,
invented this style.
yeah, back in the day, you could have said like a Fred Hambeck or something because that was a very unique style too. Um, but I mean, there's a lot of great variant artists out there. Adam Hughes has some great covers. Um, but but yeah, I guess that's the first thing that came to my mind. Scotty Young, yeah.
No, fair enough. I like my Scotty Young stuff. I like my Scotty Young stuff, and Scotty Young is a good play right now. And there's certain Scotty Young covers that I love. I did like Superior Spider-Man 1. Actually, I don't think he did one of those. I think he did Spider-Man 700. And his baby version of that was Spider-Man on the Moon. Oh, it's just an awesome book. It's like $100 book. It's crazy. It's a fun one. But he's an expensive freaking signing artist right now. Not happy about that. I wish I got him to sign when he was cheaper. But that's all. That's all I'm gonna say. And then finally, would you rather fight one giant duck that can be broken up into 20 smaller ducks, or 20 ducks that can be turned into one giant duck?
Wait, what was that question?
You gonna make me repeat it?
Yeah.
Okay. I gotta regain my composure because it's a ridiculous question. Would you rather fight one giant duck that can be broken up into 20 smaller ducks, or 20 ducks that can be turned into one giant duck?
I guess the giant, yeah. At least then it wouldn't be embarrassing when I lost. So say it was like Noble fighting a giant. Yeah.
Well, that ends speed round, and I would ask you about cons and Kickstarter, but We spoke about that like 2 months ago, and obviously it gets old really quickly. But I do want to give you a chance outside of speed round to self promote yourself. So obviously, where could people find you? Where could people bother you? Where could people buy your merch? Where could people back the Kickstarter? Where could people, follow you on social media? Because support is not just paying money and giving people money.
Yeah.
It's actually following people on social media. And there's a little button on Facebook called the like button. Use it, please.
Yeah. So the Kickstarter is at www.superheresies.com. I have a Twitter called Heresy Studios LL. I have an Instagram account called Heresy Studios LLC Comics, and I have two Facebook pages, Heresy Studios LLC and The Order of Dracula. And I also have a website, which is www.heresystudiosllc.com.
And then obviously, I'm going to keep saying that you have to support indie. What that means is when people have Kickstarters, you actually have to back their Kickstarters, whether you're throwing $1, $5, or $100. Every little bit helps because in indie comics, people cannot do it without people backing Kickstarters or giving support. Also, you notice that people have PayPal links, Patreon links, Buy Me a Coffee links. All that stuff is helpful. And even going outside of Kickstarter. Once somebody's Kickstarter ends, if they do have stuff on their website and you would like to purchase it, obviously purchase it from them. Or if they're in comic shops and you would rather purchase it from a comic shop, I think that's perfectly fine as well because it's supporting local business as well. But that's another way how to support. But also, if money's tight or something is not your cup of tea, obviously, I personally don't want anybody to, go into debt to buy comics or buy something they're going to regret. But you can share it out. You could follow somebody on Facebook. You can check out what they're doing. It goes a long way. And you could share, like, comment, and you could just say, hey, really like your Kickstarter. Good luck. That's also helpful in a lot of ways. And it goes a long way too. And also, you'll be notified when their next project hits. And it might be something that's more your cup of tea. As far as I'm concerned, obviously, I just dropped something in the comments that'll pop up in a second. That is my lecture on Thursday at 9 p.m/9:05 p.m. We're talking about comic book investing. It's going to be a fascinating discussion. It's going to be very cool for 45 minutes, and we're going to go through a lot of basic stuff and give you a very, very interesting overview. Every indie content creator is going to need that class. Every person who just wants to invest in comics is going to need that class. And there's going to be a lot of cool information, and it's going to get people's brains turning and a variety of other stuff. So I recommend that if you can make it. If you can't make it live, it'll be up there for a while. And there's some cool stuff going on with that. Also, you can support me, obviously, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. It's Pop Anime Comics on all those platforms. YouTube is Pop Anime Comics. I have Buy Me a Coffee if you'd like to check that out. I appreciate all support, but donations are not necessary. But I do appreciate donations because they do help keep this show active. Also, if you want to advertise on my show, you can hit me up. Or if you just want to pick my brain on anything and everything, or if you would like to send me gifts, I do appreciate a good laugh. So please go do that. And if it's really funny, I'll actually send a gift back. And we will start a gift war. Not a gift war, but a gift war or a GIF war. I'm not too sure, but obviously there we go. But yeah, this is how you support me. This is how you support Joseph Duis. Obviously back the Kickstarter. And on that note, I'm going to give you the final word.
I would say go watch that show on Thursday at 9 p.m. And then when you're done with that, go over to superheresies.com and back there. And if you can't back, then share it. And then we can keep making these fun little stories about Golden Age characters.
Well, I don't think I could have said that any better myself.